Hey everybody, welcome back. We are here talking still about Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. You know, I was going to use this video to talk about the various elements of symbolism in the book. However, that's kind of stepping on the toes of an upcoming Lit Lab, where I'm going to talk about symbolism in general. So I figure I'll take that stuff and use it in there. So you have something to look forward to. You folks who are watching now, you know what's coming. Yay! I want to kind of jump ahead in my list of things and talk about sort of the cultural and political commentary of this book. There's a lot of it. This book is, in one sense, of course, it is a memoir. It is about Marjane Satrapi kind of growing up from a kind of idealistic, rule-breaking, impulsive girl into a young woman living away from home who's trying to find herself, and eventually becoming the person that she probably never expected to be. So there is certainly that, and we will talk about that maybe in the next video. But right now, the other part of it is that it is a commentary on culture and politics, because it can't not be. Pretty much any kind of coming-of-age story that you're going to read is going to have some sort of commentary on an element of the culture in which it is set. That's just how it is, because a person who is growing up and finding themselves as an adult has to learn how to navigate these complicated cultural hurdles and puzzles and mazes that their older forebears have already figured out. So there's a few things I want to talk about from this book that are brought up. This is in no particular order except the order that I get to them. So hey, let's see what happens. The first one, why don't we start with, of course, as feminism. That's a big one, mostly because the first chapter and one chapter much later on are entitled The Veil. The wearing of the veil is key to a lot of moments in the book. It's very important to not only how the character of Marjane moves about her world in Iran, but also how women in general kind of live in Iran, especially during the times of more religious, theocratic governance. So why don't we talk about that first? So the veil itself, of course, is an element of Muslim worship. It is something that if you look around the world to various Muslim communities, they have interpreted the need for women to cover themselves to varying degrees. You'll see some areas where women just wear a headpiece, a headscarf, for example, and all the way to other parts of the world where women are completely covered and there's no part of their body that is visible. And it is highly, for a lot of people, it is controversial, probably mostly people who aren't really living in those cultures. It is hard to make no, I take that back. It is easy to make a judgment about other people's culture. It's incredibly easy. It's very hard to make a well thought out and well educated argument about it. But what Satrapi does in her book is she kind of takes us from the point where the veil was not necessary, because if you do look at a lot of older photographs of Iran before the Islamic Revolution, you see a lot of women walking around bareheaded, dressed in very Western styles. And that's kind of where young Marjane starts, is she starts in an Iran that doesn't really take that sort of thing very seriously. And the very beginning of the book, the very first page of the book, is when she's in elementary school, and the girls there in their school now have to wear the veil. It's part of their required uniform. And you see the girls running around kind of playing with it on the playground. They're sort of playing tug of war with it. They're really not taking it very seriously. But the book incorporates the veil in many different places. So you find women in the story are kind of in many ways working in two directions on the veil. And this is something that actually made me think of Handmaid's Tale, which I think is probably a good book to do in this series sooner rather than later. Some women try to find ways to subvert the rules of the veil, right? They figure out how to wear it in such a way that they can still show a little bit of hair, or what is the most correct but least sort of obtrusive way to wear the veil. There's a scene much later in the book where she kind of shows how, by looking at the shape of the veil that women are using, you can see sort of what their style is underneath that veil. You can see women trying to wear the veil well enough that it doesn't attract the attention of like the religious police or the regular police, and yet show some form of identity. There's a panel that you see in the book where she shows, like, here's what a fundamentalist woman would wear, and it's just all black. But here's what a more modern progressive woman would wear. She's still wearing the veil, but she's also wearing more sort of less traditional clothing. So women in Iran are trying to, during this period that Satrapi is showing us, they're trying to adapt to what the veil means and to what it means to them. And you could, of course, take this as a symbolic representation of women having to make a way in the world and figure out their lives based on the rules that men set in place. Because by and large, they're not the people setting up the rules of the veil are not women. Now, there are female characters who enforce the veil. There are female characters who enforce the sort of theocratic vision of what women are, which is that women are to be hidden and unseen, and that anything a woman does that catches the attention of a man is kind of by definition sexual. There's one moment in the book where Marjane is running to catch a bus, and a couple of officers stop her, and they say, "Well, by running, we can see your butt," and because apparently that is their problem of finding her butt sexy is now her problem. And there are women who take part in this and who help to enforce these rules and who try to help get other women in line. And you will see that in some conservative or fundamentalist cultures, there are women who will do their best to try to get other women to step in line, as it were. That kind of makes it complex because, again, coming from an American point of view, coming from sort of a Western world point of view, a lot of times we see the veil as this just oppressive thing that is enforced upon women that they cannot really make any choices about, which is broadly true. But we don't see the complexity of it. We don't see the complexity of what it means. We don't really see all the different ways in which wearing it can show your particular attitude towards the world. We don't see the ways in which it creates and generates different relationships between people because it's not part of our culture. It's not a thing that we have to do. And because we are alien to it, we cannot truly understand it. And I think one of the things that Satrapi does in this book, or is trying to do in this book, is to try to help us understand what the veil is and what it means to women like her, right? And to maybe try to help us understand it better. And as long as we're talking about culture, what's also interesting about the book is how Satrapi positions Western culture. And especially as a child, she really, really likes a lot of Western, clothes and music and media. And pretty early in the days of the Islamic Revolution, they said that Western culture is basically it's wrong. It is something that should not be done. In fact, one of the first things we see of that is she's in a bilingual school, like a French international school. And the bilingual schools are all shut down because they are examples of Western decadence. That was the word I was looking for, Western decadence. And so we see at various points during especially the first part of the book when she is young and rebellious and where she is trying to assert herself as a person, maybe without the delicacy and diplomacy she could possibly use, where she is trying to seek out Western influences and she's trying to seek out Western culture. There's a really good moment in the story where her family goes abroad. They go to Europe, and she says, bring me some Kim Wilde posters. And her parents, bless their heart, her parents come across real well in this book. But her parents basically managed to smuggle these posters of rock stars home by sewing them into the back lining of her father's coat. So he's going through customs, coming into a round like this, doesn't dare bend his back for fear that he'll wrinkle the posters. And the customs officer's like, "You got anything?" So, no. But yeah, in a lot of ways, Western culture, Western entertainment, Western music and film and TV are seen as kind of these rebellious, transgressive things that people covet, that they really want to get, because that is their way, secretly, however it is, to try and make a statement about the very kind of tight religious culture that they're living in. And so, yeah, we see that throughout the book in various ways, not just the posters. We see, for example, people having these parties, drinking wine, listening to music. There's all these ways in the book that people are trying to find a way to express themselves. And what's interesting is that the title of the book, right, is Persepolis, which is the capital of an ancient Persian empire. And the question that I have in my mind is, my question that I had when I first read the book is, why title it Persepolis? Because that comes up only in one chapter of the book, I think. One chapter of the book is called Persepolis and references the ancient capital. And I think what it does is it's sort of a reminder that Persian culture, Iranian culture is a more modern thing, but Persian culture is ancient, and it has a long history of varied and sundry and interesting elements of, again, music and art and literature and poetry. Persian poetry is amazing. And it is so rich and full of life that this period she's writing about is one small piece of that. It's part of the history now. It's part of the culture now, and there's no way around that. But it is one part in a vast timeline of culture that I would kind of like to have seen maybe explored more in the book called Persepolis. It seems like Satrapi as a writer and Satrapi as a character seems to be much more focused on things that are not Iran, and I can understand why. But I think another version of this book, or another type of Persepolis, might be somebody trying to fight against the religious institutionalism by going to the past, by going back to Persian culture and seeing what could be brought up and seeing what could be accessed from there. I don't know. I'm not an expert in Persian culture. But nevertheless, I think a lot of the book did have these cultural elements and asking questions about how do you assimilate to a culture? Should you assimilate to a culture? Especially when she goes to Europe and she's in Austria and she is just kind of rudderless and doesn't really know what to do. She can't assimilate there. And people in Europe kind of look at Iran and they just see people of Iran as a bunch of crazy religious freaks. And she doesn't have a place there, and she eventually has to come back. So, yeah, how deeply can you assimilate to a culture? Should you assimilate to a culture? What parts of it should be taken on? And what does it mean when you don't really have a choice, right? When there are the instruments of violence, like the police force, are trying to keep you following a very specific line. So, again, a lot of these questions that come up, which I think she is raising for us, the Western non-Iranian audience, to ask ourselves again, in order to show that Iran is a complex story. It cannot be dismissed and it cannot be summed up in a very simple sort of stereotypical understanding of it. And even when we talk about that oppressive government, the politics of the whole thing, I just, as of the taping of this video, there was a recent attack on a Hamas leader who was assassinated in Iran. And so on TV, we've got people, protests in Iran. And one of the things that are coming up all over and over again is the classic Death to America chant. That's kind of what I grew up with, is hearing Death to America coming from Iran. I still remember, I vaguely, and I'm probably quoting it wrong, but an old Doonesbury comic strip where they basically say, well, it's just pro forma these days. Just, Death to America. Okay, what's for lunch? But yeah, there's this engagement of the citizenry with politics and with protesting, which is really interesting. And not so much the Death to America type, but protesting against their own government, especially early on in the book, where you have people who are trying to make martyrs out of people who had nothing to do with, for example, the Iran-Iraq war. You've got people who are going, her parents especially, who go out to protest against the Shah, the celebrations when the Shah is brought down. So again, you get the sense that this is a country where people are intensely invested in their government and in their way of life, even when it's difficult for them to do so, which I think is a lesson for a lot of us in kind of modern liberal democracies who kind of just assume that, well, it'll all be taken care of, or, well, we can rely on maybe the loudest, most unhinged people to do the protesting. That, maybe we do need to be maybe more involved. So ultimately, when I think about this book and this book as a source of cultural and political commentary, there are a few things that I take away from it. One is that I don't really understand Iran, which is okay. And I think that's better than thinking I did understand Iran, which is not great. But it suggests to me that if I want to know Iran better, and I mean, Iran's going to be in the news for a little while, then it is beholden on me to go out and learn things and not wait for someone like Marjane Satrapi, Once again, a woman stepping up to teach men what they need to know. Not wait for someone like Marjane Satrapi to kind of put it in a nice comic book for me. There's a lot to learn and a lot to know. And I think that's a big, important lesson of this book. Another, of course, is that people engage with their culture in different ways. People are always going to be trying to navigate a cultural landscape that, again, as you're young, you don't understand. And you think you understand because you're young and you think you're brilliant. But you make these mistakes. And again, it really, really is a very, very human story of Marjane trying to figure out her life and herself in this country that she's living in. So there's a lot to take from this book. I really hope that all of this made sense. I got some bullet points on the screen, and I hope that all worked. But I think there's a lot to get from this book. There's a lot that comes up every time I read it, and I'm sure what I'm looking forward to is when I teach the book. Most of my class are girls, and so I'm actually really, really interested in seeing what their reactions are to the story of someone kind of around their age in a lot of ways. You know, again, the Marjane of this book is slightly younger than I am. Let's call it that. Slightly. In the same way that, you know, Mount Everest is slightly above sea level. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to talking about the book with them and seeing what their reactions are. So like I said, I really enjoyed the book. I'm having a great time with it. I got a couple more videos in this series, I think, and you will, of course, as I said, you'll see Persepolis pop up again when we get to symbolism in the Lit Lab. But until then, thank you all very much for sticking around with me. I really do appreciate it. If you have any thoughts about this, if you're from Iran, my analytics on YouTube are still not great because I don't have quite enough views. Hint, hint. But if you're from Iran and you're familiar with this, and you can tell me just how badly I've gotten it wrong, please let me know. I would love to hear more from you. I'd love to hear what your insights are into some of these topics as well. Because again, a lot of these are very foreign to me. I am a man raised in America. It's not really my thing, and I'm trying to interpret it as best I can. So thanks again, and yeah, stay well. See you in the next video.